Hey everyone. Um, I would like to introduce myself. My name's Johnny Schul. I am a student in the Tempe area, and I will be taking the response position that it is not in the interest of the U.S. for China to expand its world power, and in fact that it is detrimental to the U.S. Um, Part of what makes the U.S. successful currently in terms of international politics from a neorealist perspective is that it operates as a hegemony. So essentially, the fact that the US has such an oversized influence is what creates the situation where it doesn't have to use that influence actively or aggressively in so many situations. So, um, because of the fact that we tend to rely on and have more stable relationships with democratic countries, or orders for that matter. For example, the EU is structured as a democracy on top of other democracies, essentially. Um, we do not have that kind of transparency with China because they are essentially one party rule. While that doesn't affect necessarily some of the economic implications, it does actually affect, um, for example, the cultural implications. So, um, sorry, let me move on to my next point. Um, if you look at it from the behavioralistic standpoint, um, essentially, if you want to predict what other people's or cultures or nations or groups of people's uh, next moves are going to be, and you want to use the behavioralism model, you could look at it and argue that more influence from China is going to lead to a situation where, as their power rises and the U.S.'s power, and as we kind of teeter totter but become more and more equal to one another, you see a situation where that combined with the crumbling of some of our more democratic institutions over the last few years, the tension between European liberalism and American liberalism and now isolationism, arguably. Um, if you are not a part of that system, let's say you're a smaller country that neighbors China, like anything in the South Pacific or anything south of Japan, um, you might see a situation to think, well, maybe democracy isn't working out so well. And maybe we should be on the side of China because they're our neighbor and they're growing and it's working for them. And that can create a situation where we actually lose allies. And China is able then to use its increased influence to work against us by bartering with people who are adversarial to us as a nation. Um, so ultimately, their gain comes as our loss because our current situation is a de facto prominence in most of world order because of our outsized influence. It kind of makes me think of the Teddy Roosevelt is typically quoted as saying, speak softly and carry a big stick. And I think that that kind of explains our current situation where, granted, does the U.S. engage in all kinds of things that maybe it shouldn't in other countries? Depending on your standpoint, yes, it does. But we aren't currently at this moment actively starting wars with world powers. Fingers crossed there that that doesn't happen anytime soon. Knock on wood. Um, we're not doing that right now. So, uh, with that in mind, it makes it to where we are able to live that speak softly, carry a big stick mentality. Um, the last few things I wanted to point out would be let's see, yes, state system. Sorry, looking through my notes. Um, Finally, the state system, as argued in neorealism, uh, implies anarchy. There is an undertone of anarchy to everything that separates the line between a state. What makes one state start on this side and another state, the space between them is the anarchy, essentially. And so, with that in mind, if the power of the Chinese and the power of the US start to pull those two apart, it creates more space for additional anarchy to pop through in international relations, both directly between the countries and the people and other states and actors that operate between them. So there's my not particularly concise, but that's me.